was it like politically in Palestine at this time? Were you aware of the kinds of...
Well, politically, I was very aware of Jewish effort to make Palestine into a Jewish state, and actually I had some more distant relatives, and one of them was in Haganah, which was the Jewish underground military organization, and he tried to recruit me. I went to a secret meeting, and but I decided I really didn't want to fight the British. I wanted to fight the Germans.
And did you have a sense that there ought to be a Jewish state, or this was...
Oh, yes, I definitely had a sense that there ought to be a Jewish state, yes. I think all Jews had that sense.
But at this very young age, you did not want to stay there and fight the British in order to get a Jewish state.
Right. There was...
Yeah. So what...
Well, my priority was to fight the Germans. I was more interested in ending the war in Europe, yes.
Right. You're studying in the high school, but you've already attended some high school. So what class do you start in when you're in Tel Aviv? And is high school 4 years the way it is here? It's not.
Well, in the Polish system, just before the war, and even now, it is 6 years of elementary school, and then 4 years of high school, and 2 years of something called lyceum or liceum in Polish. And but the 6 years altogether were sort of called high school because it was one unit.
Right.
And in Poland they were separate, but here they were one. Some in Poland were together, but some were separate. But I basically was in the last 2 years of high school.
Right.
In Palestine, yeah.
So did you start in 1940 or 1941?
And mind you, I didn't lose a single year of education, of school.
Really?
During the war, because my parents were sending me to school in Romania and in Tel Aviv, so that when I was 16, I got the British matriculation, and when I was 17, I got the Polish matriculation. So I had sort of two high schools.
Huh. So you graduated from this high school, when was that, in 43?
In 42, actually, yes. And I then had a choice of either going to a university in Palestine, in Polytechnic at Haifa, or joining the Palestinian brigade or joining the Polish army. Now the military, there was no conscription because the Poles had no right to conscript anybody in Palestine, and the British were not conscripting Jews to go into the brigade. It was all voluntary. And I decided to go along with all my friends to the Polish army. And my parents weren't completely happy, but respected my choice. But they asked me to wait till I was 18. So I waited a few months and I joined the army in 43.
Did they try to dissuade you from doing this?
Not completely. They just wanted me to wait a few months till I was a little older.
Now, from what I understand from the history, it's very unusual at that time for Jews who were living in Palestine to join Anders' army rather than the Jewish brigade of the British, or to leave altogether and join Haganah or Irgun or one of the other groups
Yes.
fighting the British. So you are an unusual Jewish person doing this at this time, no?
Well, actually, all my Jewish colleagues in the Polish high school, we had maybe 1/3 of the students were Jewish. Just about all of them joined the Polish
They
army.
did.
Yes, and some of the Jews who came with General Anders from the Soviet Union stayed in Palestine,
Right.
partly because they had had enough and they wanted to settle after being deported to Russia. But some of us thought it was important for Jews to fight, and to compensate for those who stayed behind. So
Right.
most of my Jewish colleagues went to the army, to the Polish army.
But did you consider going into the Jewish brigade that the British government was forming? Or
I considered it, yes, because I had a Polish friend who was the son of my mother's close friend who did, but I decided against it.
And what do you remember the reasoning that you used to decide one way rather than another?
I sort of didn't identify at that time completely my future with Palestine completely.
And with whatever the Jewish interest was particularly. So you felt both Jewish and Polish.
Right.
And so you wanted to be able to express.
And I was interested in we thought we might still return to Poland at that point. Who knows?
Right. So you actually thought it was possible
We thought it might be possible.
to return to Poland with the army?
No,
Or
no,
as to live there?
no, possibly to live there, although United States was more likely. But my father still had the key from the house that he
He did.
treasured, and he thought someday he was going back.
That's interesting. Now, were your parents also okay with your going into Anders' army as opposed to with the Jewish brigade, or were they also not quite so identified
They were okay with that.
Yes.
Yes, they most of their friends were Polish Jewish refugees or Polish refugees who lived in Palestine. There was a large group of Polish refugees in Palestine. Many people don't know it,
Yes.
but the British evacuated the Poles from Romania
Right.
through Cyprus to Palestine.
You're a young person at this time who wants to go to school, who may have given up your dreams about being a prophet, but you clearly had ideas about a real future. But now you're going to go into an army where you could very well get killed.
Right, but I never thought of getting killed.
You didn't?
No,
You thought you would be protected
right,
somehow.
yes.
So, how do you go into this army? You go to an office and you sign up? What do you
Well, you go to the Polish consulate and you say you want to volunteer for the army, and they say, well, thank you, and we will call upon you, and you'll have a medical examination, and we'll enlist you. And then a few months later, they did that.
And was there an issue because you were Jewish, or they didn't
No,
care?
not
No
at
issue.
all, no issue.
So did you wait a few months?
Well, I waited till they called
Till
me.
they called you.
Yeah.
And then you got called, and then
And
go
then
into
in
training.
43, early in 43,
Right.
I think in February or so, I was called, and first received the training as a recruit, and I was, my training was in Egypt on the northern side of Suez Canal in El Kasassin, which is close to the Suez Canal, but not on the Egyptian side, but on the Palestinian side. And I trained in tanks, and it was quite difficult because when an officer moved his hand, you had to climb into the tank, and he moved his hand again, you had to climb out, and I was bruised all over from the metal climbing in and out. But, you know, you close the flap over your head, and you're in a pretty closed environment, and I learned to drive a tank, I always say, before I learned to drive a car. And tank you drive by pulling with your hands. If you want to turn left, you brake on the left, and the tank rotates left.
Really?
And if you want to turn to the right, you brake with your right hand, and the tank moves the other way. So, and we also had a gun, and when the gun was firing, it made a lot of noise over. You're right there. So I then had an opportunity to go to officer school, and I was very happy to leave the tanks and go to the artillery officer school. And I became what's known in Polish as officer cadet, or podchorąży in Polish. When you graduate, you get qualified to become an officer, but you have to get promoted through different ranks. And I was assigned to light anti-aircraft artillery, which was 5th Regiment, or which was part of the 5th Infantry Division. And I was assigned to go to Italy, because Polish Army by then had participated, was entering the Italian campaign. Right. And I was, after I had, by the way, toured Cairo and seen the Sphinx and the pyramids, I ended up going to Port Said, and we took a boat to go to Italy.
Let me stop you for a moment. You said a while back that you were not very athletic.
Right.
So I'm wondering how all of this training was when you were training in the tank. Not only did you get black and blue, but how difficult was this for you?
Well, I wasn't very athletic with bicycles or with running, but I did play soccer a little bit, and I wasn't that bad.
Oh, okay.
No.
But nevertheless, it was very different from what you were used to.
Right.
That kind of training.
Right.
Yes?
Right. It was.
And it wasn't intellectual. It was very
right.
physical.
And very physical. In the but it wasn't a problem really.
It wasn't.
No.
And when you went to officer school, what does that mean, officers training? Because you were a kid.
Right.
Right?
Well, I was but at the same time I was a good student, so I wasn't so bad.
Actually, you're not a kid. You were 18 years old.
18,
yes,
yeah.
Right.
And some of the others had more experience. I was one of the youngest, definitely. One of the youngest in the army and one of the youngest in the officer school.
And most of the boys that...
But I was used to that.
You were used to that?
To being young, yes.
Yes. But now, were many of the boys in your unit, if there was a particular unit that you were with, had they had experience fighting? Or had some training before, and you were unusual in that as well?
Well, most of the other soldiers and officers had been in Russia, so they had experience with being in Russian forced labor camps and in Siberia. So they were actually also very sort of used not being at home for several years, and I was one of the few. I mean, in Palestine, not that many Poles joined the army in Palestine.
Right.
Yeah. Never mind Jews, even Poles, there were very few. So that most of them were veterans, and most of them were older. Most of the Polish soldiers at that point were older than we who came from the Palestinian detachment.
And how did they treat you? Were they nice? Were they okay?
They were nice. I was treated like everybody else.
Right.